If I conferred with our furry friends, man to animal, think of the amazing repartee. If I could walk with the animals, talk with the animals, grunt and squeak and squawk with the animals, and they could talk to me.
Hello and welcome to Pet Watch, a monthly program about the Williamson County Animal Center. I'm Debbie Sims and I'll be your host today. And it's April, so we're going to talk about rabies. It's an annual topic that comes up in the spring and summer. And my special guest today to help us understand what rabies is and how to prevent it and keep our animals and our families protected is Dr. Debra Burch. Hi, Debra.
Hey.
I don't know if any of you have met Debra before. She's kind of behind the scenes busy all the time at the shelter. She is our full-time shelter veterinarian. And tell us, what do you do at the shelter every day? Tell us about that.
We do a lot of surgery, a lot of spay-neuter for the animals in the shelter and for any pets that are surrendered to the shelter. We also do the medical care, any disease prevention, just...
A kitten or gets an upper respiratory infection, you diagnose, prescribe the drugs, and the staff administers those. Now, you did a phenomenal number of spay-neuters in 2015, and my hat's off to you. It was over 2,000, I think, sort of in the 2,200 range. An amazing number, but so important for controlling the pet population.
Right, thank you.
As a shelter, we don't adopt out any animals that are not spayed and neutered. Unless they're not old enough.
Right, correct.
Now, what happens if they're too young? What do you do for adopters?
We take a deposit, and they are required to come back when that pet is old enough for their sterilization surgery. So it's scheduled out.
Okay, and it's usually age or weight?
Age or weight, exactly.
Okay. Today, our topic is rabies. Our shelter conducts annual rabies clinics every Saturday in April, so that's why this topic comes up each April, and we like to remind the community how important it is. What exactly is rabies?
Rabies is a virus, and it is transmitted usually through a deep bite wound in the saliva. Okay,
now the origin of rabies is usually in wildlife, is it not?
Correct.
Okay, so what happens? We have a pet at home we hopefully keep vaccinated, and if people don't get anything else out of this program, have the pet vaccinated annually.
Yes.
So how would a pet come in contact with the rabies virus?
Usually through contact with a wild animal. Either our cats or dogs are out there doing their natural behaviors, and they come in contact with and fight with a rabid skunk, raccoon, bat, and that's how they would get in contact with rabies.
Okay, so in this area, it's usually a skunk.
Yes.
And it depends on the part of the country that you're in. You don't rule out any wildlife because I guess it could be anywhere.
Right.
But in Middle Tennessee particularly, it is usually found in skunks.
Correct.
And how many cases, I think you did a little research for us,
right.
Were there any cases last year in Tennessee?
There were. In 2015, in our county alone, we had 3 positive skunks test positive for rabies. 1 was in Brentwood, 1 was in Station, and 1 was in College Grove. So
I remember the Brentwood case, and it was a property that had dogs, family dogs, and some horses, and then the skunk came onto the property, and the animals had unknown amount of contact. The dogs made a little contact with the skunk. Mm-hmm. So we watched them for 10 days in what you call a home quarantine.
Yes.
Okay. And then the horses had to be evaluated by a veterinarian. So it is a serious thing.
It is.
If a skunk is found, or any other rabid animal.
It is.
Is that one of the only diseases that animals have that can end up in people?
No, there are other zoonotic diseases. Rabies is such a big public health concern because it is nearly 100% fatal. And there are other diseases such as West Nile virus or malaria, different things like that.
I've heard of salmonella from turtles, West Nile you mentioned from mosquito bites. So Zoonotic means animals have it, but they can give it to people.
Correct.
Okay, that's not a term I'd heard before, but it's good to know.
Yes.
Now, people are pretty far down the chain for contracting rabies, and they don't
Yes.
contract it often because you've got the wild animal has to have it, and usually goes through the pet
Right.
and then to the human.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so your family is at risk,
Right.
and your family pets are at risk. You mentioned that it is a fatal disease,
Right.
but it's also 100% preventable.
It is.
Theoretically.
Right.
No vaccine is 100% effective, but the rabies vaccine is known to prevent the disease, is it not?
It's highly effective, and if you stay current on your rabies vaccine, that really does protect your pets and your family.
What happens to an animal that has rabies? What part of the body does it affect?
It affects the brain, and it causes an encephalitis, and you see neurologic signs in that pet.
What did that include? Like the wild, let's talk about the wild animal too. What behaviors might the skunk as a source exhibit?
They would be acting strange. They may be wobbly, unable to walk. They may be out during times of the day when they normally would not. And aggression, losing their natural fear of humans or dogs, cats, that sort of thing.
So if a skunk just wanders through your yard, that's not a rabies
Not-
case.
Correct.
Usually.
Yes.
But if a skunk is acting erratically or walking in circles
Yes.
or falling over, or it looks
Yes.
like it's got a neurological problem that's causing it to not be able to walk,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Or it's exhibiting aggressive behavior,
Right.
very aggressive behavior. But just because you see, we get calls a lot at the shelter, there's a skunk walking through my yard. Well, that is normal behavior. And
Correct.
people, as you know, in this area is getting bigger and bigger, and we are encroaching on the wildlife.
Yes.
So just think about it like a deer. Yeah, they walk through the yard, but they go on about their business.
Right.
And I was talking to one of our animal control officers, and they said they get more and more calls because of development of,
Right.
hi, I just came out of the store and there's a raccoon in the parking lot. Well, that happens around
Right.
here.
And it's not necessarily a problem.
Yeah, and I think people should be aware if they take their dogs on vacation, the different parts of the country, different animals carry
Yes.
the rabies virus. I found that so interesting.
Yeah.
In the desert areas, it's like a little desert fox or some ground squirrel type thing, and then in East Tennessee, it's usually a raccoon, and so it has been carried and known to be carried by many different forms of wildlife.
Absolutely.
Cattle, dogs, horses, goats, sheep, everybody's at risk in a farm setting. All the animals are at risk. So that's why the prevention is so important. I know everybody's heard about rabies for years, and I think the image that comes to our minds is the rabid dog in To Kill a Mockingbird. Is that not?
Yes.
Yeah. Remember, everybody run inside because there's a rabid dog. That all changed in the late 40s or 50s. What happened then? Did somebody research and develop a vaccination? Is that what?
They did, and it's very effective, highly effective. And you know, the typical portrayal of rabies is more the aggression, and that's not necessarily a true portrayal of how rabies affects our pets. They can become aggressive, but they also will have these other neurologic signs of not being able to walk and excessive salivation and
The saliva is where the virus is live
Yes.
in the body?
Yep.
Okay. So the old foaming at the mouth is probably not an accurate description.
Right.
But I've seen a film that the staff watched a short film video clip of two dogs that had rabies.
Yeah.
They looked like they were had the shake. They were
The
shaking.
tremors, yeah.
They had tremors. They weren't aggressive, but
Yeah.
they were obviously dying. It is a fatal illness,
Yes.
and it was sad to see, especially when it's so preventable.
Right.
And I think it started back years ago with bats.
Yeah.
Most people don't know that, but It's been traced back to 1700 and nobody knew what was going on. And then in the United States, we started these vaccinations in the 50s of all our domestic pets. So we basically eliminated the disease, right?
We did in our domestic
in
pets.
dogs and cats.
Yes.
And that way it stayed in the wildlife
Right.
population, which there's no way to vaccinate them.
Right.
What about the fact that rabies still exists? What's the problem?
Well, it's always going to be carried in the wildlife, just as you said. We can't vaccinate them, but if by vaccinating our dogs and our cats, you're kind of creating a barrier to protect the human population from coming in contact with the rabies virus.
Because we're not likely to come in contact with
Much
animals
less
in the
likely.
woods,
Yes.
like our mischievous dog might be.
Right, much
Okay.
less likely.
It is more prevalent worldwide, though.
It is.
There are many places where dogs are not routinely vaccinated.
Right, and they're going to have more of a problem in those areas.
They're going to have the human cases too. Now, let's go back to the bats for a minute.
Okay.
We get a call often. There's a bat in my yard, laying in my yard. What should I do? What is a citizen to do if they see a bat? Is that necessarily inherently bad or dangerous?
Not unless they have known exposure to the bat with their pet, or their child is curious and has gone out and touched it, that sort of thing. But we will have people bring in bats to the shelter, and we will test those for rabies as well. Again, here in Middle Tennessee, it's much more common to have rabies in our skunks.
When we have to have an animal, be it wildlife with a suspected case of rabies, where do we send those specimens for testing? Who controls that in the state of Tennessee?
We send them to Cord Lab, who then sends them to the state lab for testing of rabies. There's a specific test that's done on the brain tissue.
And then we get a report back.
Yes.
Okay, and so that way we know, and unfortunately the animal will not survive.
No.
And can be a risk. Obviously, they don't survive. Humans don't usually survive rabies.
No.
So let's suppose that we're walking down the street and our neighbor's dog comes after us or gets a little aggressive and nips us. We get a
Right.
dog bite.
Correct.
What is our first course of action there? What should it be?
Well, certainly to seek first aid for yourself for the bite wound, going to the urgent care, emergency room, depending on the severity, and letting the doctors there do the appropriate wound care. Doctors are required, if there is a dog bite presented to them, to report that bite to animal control officials. And so then we handle the pet from that point on. We look into whether the pet has been rabies vaccinated. Is it current? Regardless, that pet is required to have a 10-day observation. And during that 10-day time frame, they're looking for signs of illness. And at the end of the 10-day observation period, the pet does have to be cleared by a veterinarian as not showing any symptoms of rabies.
Now, the homeowner who owned the dog
Right.
is the other side of the story.
Right.
And that's another reason to have your pets current on their rabies vaccinations.
Right.
Because the first thing the animal control officer is going to ask you, or the neighbor who was bitten, will say, do you have proof of rabies?
Right.
If you have it and you can get it immediately, you might save yourself a little trouble
Absolutely.
at the hospital.
Absolutely.
What is the treatment if you're bitten and the owner can't immediately produce proof of rabies vaccination for the animal? What happens at the hospital? What is a rabies treatment like?
For the person or
For the person who was bitten.
Well, they're going to flush any wounds, of course, and stitches if needed, antibiotics, that sort of thing. But the pet owner may actually receive a citation if their pet is not current on their rabies vaccination, because that is a law here in the state of Tennessee. And again, the dog will have to be held for an 10-day observation period.
It just helps everything all around if
It does.
you can produce that. And it's dogs and cats both
It is.
required.
Correct.
I had a family member have to have the series of rabies shots, and I know.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, my husband was bitten while I was riding his bicycle, and the person who owned the pet couldn't produce the rabies vaccination record. So,
Okay.
you know, when back in the 60s, it was a lot of shots to the abdomen.
Yes.
And now it's a little better. It's
It
only
is.
a series of 4 or 5. And
4, I believe.
yeah, and going back to the hospital for a few weeks, getting a shot, another
Yes.
shot, another shot. It's nothing to be laughed at. It is serious that you have that exposure, but if you go seek medical care, you won't die immediately.
Right.
You're going to be fine.
Right. They do have a treatment
Right, they have a
available.
treatment. It's when if a person didn't get treated and actually contracted the disease, and it in the human, it goes to the brain as well.
Right.
Okay. What about cats? I know a lot of people think cats don't get rabies. It's just dogs.
Right. That's not true.
That's not true.
Rabies can affect any mammal. And so a cat can be out there doing its hunting or, just roaming about and come in contact with a rabid skunk. And so they are just as at risk as our dog population.
Now, what should a person do if they see wildlife acting strangely?
They should definitely contact the animal control facility and get in touch with one of the officers there. And as far as if it's acting neurologic, we will come out and pick up that animal, potentially test it for rabies if there's any chance that there's been exposure to a human or a pet.
Is that a examination at the state lab of the animal itself, of the wildlife itself? Is that what
It
they do?
is. It's of their brain tissue.
So you can't do a blood test to see if
No.
an animal has rabies?
No, the
Okay.
only testing is brain tissue testing.
And we wouldn't want that to happen to anybody's pet.
No.
The annual rabies vaccination is also a question for some pet owners. And one of our animal control officers told me, they asked someone if their animal was current on rabies, and they said, yeah, we got one when they were 1 year old. Well, she said, well, they're 6 now. So
Right.
why does it have to be done annually?
Well, they need to have a booster to boost that immune system to make sure that they continue to have protection against rabies. So it is law, and it's usually determined by county. Puppies receive their rabies vaccination at about 12 to 16 weeks of age. Then they have a booster when they're 1 year old. And then depending on the county you live in, they're either required to have annual rabies vaccines or every 3 years.
We were talking about the humans who end up receiving treatment for possible rabies exposure and the shots and the hospital visit with possible stitches and wound care and infection. I was shocked to find out that there are 40,000 people that happens to every year.
Right.
That's amazing.
A lot of bites.
How do you prevent a dog? How do you keep from getting a dog bite? What should a person do if they, especially teach their children? What do we
Right.
need to know about a dog? Most dogs aren't inherently aggressive toward humans, but they might have a quirk or two that you may set them off.
Yeah. And I think just a healthy respect for dogs that you are not familiar with, and responsible pet ownership, not letting your dog roam loose. We do have a leash law as well in our county, and I think teaching children a healthy respect, not making them fearful in any way, but just a healthy respect for dogs.
And if your dog is a wanderer and you're not obeying the leash law, you're opening yourself up to a lot of unknowns.
You are, and potentially a lot of serious risk with the rabies virus.
Yeah, and the invisible fencing brings another issue to,
Yeah.
because we've had people who the dog was within the fence, but the child from down the street walked through the
Right.
invisible fencing, and
Or the delivery person, or the meter reader.
Yeah. So there is a responsibility that pet owners have.
Yes.
What are some of the other dangers that exist around the home that, especially in the summertime, I like to always touch on that when the warmer weather starts, we start cleaning our pools, we start opening our grills, there's shooting off firecrackers for various reasons. What are some of the other hazards that just are sitting around the house that could kill our animals?
Yeah, there are a lot of things, and things that people probably aren't aware of. I think antifreeze, of course, is one of the biggest known hazards to our pets. If it's ingested, can cause kidney failure, but there are certainly poisonous mushrooms that grow in the yard. There are wild onions that can grow in the yard and cause problems in dogs if enough is ingested. Of course, fireworks can frighten and scare our animals where they would run off and perhaps experience some sort of trauma of being hit by a car or getting lost and not being able to find their way home.
I've heard of pool chemicals too are quite a danger. That if you're cleaning your pool, don't let your dog or cat in the backyard with you because you tend to leave the chlorine bucket open because you're working on the pool, or you get some acid to clean the bottom. These things are almost instantly fatal, many of them, like antifreeze. You don't have a chance if they eat certain chemicals. Is that right?
Exactly.
Now, I also want people to be aware that a flaming barbecue pit is not a good place for dogs to be around.
Absolutely, and I've seen plenty of dogs that will get into the drippings and things from the grill, and it can cause terrible gastrointestinal problems, vomiting, diarrhea, pancreatitis. So
the enticement of the meat alone
absolutely.
is, you wouldn't leave your child, a toddler, out there, so your dog certainly can't be trusted because their instinct would be to go after the meat, and they don't know the grill's hot, so they could get burns and that kind of thing.
I've seen dogs eat, people doing kebabs, I've seen them eat the wooden skewers and trying to pass those and potentially causing problems.
My friend's puppy was severely hurt and had intestinal surgery because it ate mulch. And a piece of mulch got lodged. So
there's all kinds of things.
There's all kinds of things around. We just need to watch our dogs.
Yes, we do.
I guess the overall lesson here today is have your animals vaccinated for rabies.
Yes, ma'am.
Totally preventable and 100% fatal, and can cause you a lot of trouble in your life if your animal bites somebody and you can't produce that record. So we will be having the rabies clinics, and I appreciate you educating all of us.
Thanks for having me.
About what rabies is and how important it is to keep this disease at bay and keep it out of the population. So remember to get your animal vaccinated. We did have 2 cases just in the last few days in adjoining counties. Williamson and DeKalb had 2 dogs.
Yes, and they were not vaccinated.
Wow.
And they both tested positive for rabies.
Okay, so those 2 dogs lost their lives and put people at risk.
Yes.
And they probably contracted it from a skunk. In the wild. We'll never find that skunk probably. But the 2 dogs are now gone, and we've already had 2 cases in Tennessee. So it's out there. It's in the skunk and other wildlife populations. So please be aware of it. And in April, and every Saturday, we will be having community rabies clinics at different locations in Williamson County. These will be Saturday, April 2nd, and the 9th, the 16th, and the 23rd. Each Saturday, it's from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., and it's only $10. You drive up, there's a veterinarian there, you get your animal, dog or cat. Cats should always be in a carrier, and dogs should be on a leash. And you just need $10 cash or check to get that rabies shot, and the tags will be handed to you that day. Please, please put the tag on your dog's collar. Rabies tags can help lost dogs find their way home, and they also provide proof for the animal control officer and the shelter to know that their staff's not in danger when they pick up your animal, that you have complied. So it's important, don't throw that tag in a drawer. On April 2nd, the locations will be College Grove Elementary, Westwood Elementary, Sunset Elementary, Grassland and Trinity Elementary, and the Bethesda Deli and Market. On April 9th, Centennial High School, Lipscomb, Hunters Bend Elementary Schools, Hillsborough Middle, and Longview and Winstead Elementary. Then on April 16th, we'll be at Chapman's Retreat, Franklin High School, Page Middle, Fairview Elementary, and Crockett Elementary. Then on April 23rd at Edmondson Elementary, Brentwood Middle, Oakview, and Walnut Grove Elementary Schools, Independence High School, Nolensville Elementary, and Fox's Grocery. Then on Saturday, April 30th, your last chance to get the $10 shots will be at the shelter. Our own veterinarian, Debra Burch, will be there and her staff, and they will be giving the rabies vaccinations on April 30th from 1 to 3 at the shelter next to Franklin High School. And also on that day at the shelter event only, on the 30th of April, we will be offering microchips for $15, an invaluable way for your pet to find its way home. If your pet is lost, the first thing a person will do is take it to see if it has a microchip. That's a great deal for $15. It's a small injection in their back, a little capsule under the skin that's like the size of a grain of rice, but it carries a special number that connects back to that dog and back to your phone number online. So once you put that information online and your dog is microchipped, it can't ever be separated from you permanently. So I encourage you to get those rabies shots at any of the locations I mentioned, or go to our website, adoptwcac.org, and there you will find a list of the rabies clinics. And if you still need, your pet still needs a microchip, and you'd like to get one for $15, come by on the 30th. And Debra, thank you so much for being with us today. And microchips are important for cats too.
Yes, they are.
Right?
Yes, they are.
Because cats tend to move where the food is.
Yes.
And when you find a stray cat on your doorstep, if you scan it and it has a microchip, you can easily get it back home.
Right.
So I encourage people to do that and get those rabies shots, because we don't want any deaths among our pets in this county, and we certainly don't want any human cases.
Right.
You know, that's just
Very
something
preventable.
that's easily avoidable with a simple shot and a $10 remedy.
That's
so,
right.
yeah. Thank you for watching Pet Watch. Please come by and see us at the shelter. We're at 106 Claude Yates Drive, right next to Franklin High School. And starting in April, we will now be open on Sunday afternoons from 12 to 4. So we're crowded with animals. It's getting ready to be kitten season. So we want you to be part of the solution and adopt a pet and have your own pet spayed or neutered. Thank you again for watching Pet Watch, and I'll see you next month.
If I conferred with our furry friends, man to animal, think of the amazing repartee. If I could walk with the animals, talk with the animals, grunt and squeak and squawk with the animals, and they could talk to me. If I consulted with quadrupeds, think what fun we'd have.